What happened? Around 1996, people in Canada once wore lipstick, ate gummy candy, and even bit into sausages made from human flesh. You did not mishear. That is the truth, and I am not making it up. Hello, I am Mr. High, the 90-year-old man who specializes in retelling mysterious, dark, and completely true stories. If you are interested in chilling stories like this, please subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell. Every subscription from you is the motivation for me to keep sitting here, digging deep into the darkest secrets and telling them to you in the next videos. If you have never heard of Piggy Palace, I must warn you right now, what you are about to hear will make you shiver, and it may even keep you awake at night. But if you have heard of it before, you know that behind it lies one of the most gruesome serial murder cases in modern history. Robert Pickton was born in 1949 in the town of Port Coquitlam, British Columbia. From a young age, he lived surrounded by the stench of pig manure, blood, and decaying animal carcasses. The Pickton family owned a large pig farm where the daily work was filled with the terrified squeals of livestock and the muck of mud mixed with feces and urine that clung to every pair of boots. For others, this might have been nothing more than the harsh life of farming. But for Robert, it became the foundation of a twisted mind, a personality that grew increasingly warped over the years. When his parents died in the 1970s, the farm was passed down to the three siblings. His sister chose to leave, seeking a new life elsewhere. Robert and his brother, however, stayed behind to take control of the property. But unlike the generations before them, they had neither diligence nor the skills to run a farm. Before long, the place that had once supported the entire family business turned into a massive dump. Pigs running loose, stinking barns, rotting wooden walls, piles of garbage everywhere. Those who ever set foot there said it looked like a horror movie brought to life. Neighbors recalled that Robert and his brother almost never bathed. Even after trudging all day through mud and pig manure, they would step right into the house with their filthy boots. The few remaining farmhands could only shake their heads in disgust. A man named Bill Hiscox once said that not only was the farm frightening, but Robert himself was a bizarre figure who radiated an unsettling aura. He did not smoke, drink, or use drugs, yet his behavior was always strange, erratic, and unnerving. And then, after an unexpected twist of fate, his life took a turn no one could have foreseen. From a filthy, ragged man, he became a millionaire. And with that fortune, he would transform the rotting farm into a notorious party spot, a place that came to be known by a name both ridiculous and chilling: Piggy Palace, a name that sounded absurd and sinister, but would go on to haunt the entire nation of Canada. In 1996, the Pickton brothers declared the creation of a charity with a fancy name, the Piggy Palace Good Times Society. On paper, its purpose sounded noble, to host fundraising events in support of the community. But the moment you set foot inside what they called a palace, you would see the truth behind that thin veil of morality. Piggy Palace was, in reality, nothing more than an abandoned slaughterhouse, with rusty iron hooks still dangling from the ceiling, concrete floors stained with old dried blood, and the metallic stench that never went away. It was in that very space that the wild parties began. People flocked to Piggy Palace, not for charity, but for pleasure. Alcohol, drugs, prostitutes, all blended together in loud music and dim lights. On some nights, the number of attendees reached into the thousands, crowded like a grotesque festival. They came from everywhere, from tattooed, bald-headed bikers to drug-addicted drifters from Vancouver's downtown east side, a place where poverty, crime, and prostitution were packed tightly into fewer than 10 blocks. Robert Pickton was not just the man behind it all. He was also the one who personally lured in the prey. He often drove his beat-up pickup truck along the low track, slowly rolling past the dark corners where women stood shivering as they waited for customers. He dangled enticing promises: money, food, alcohol, drugs, and the invitation to a free party. For women living in desperation, that was a ticket out of misery, at least for one night. But what they didn't know was that this ticket was also their passage into the gates of hell. It was here that countless women went missing after attending. Yet when whispers spread through the community, when warnings were passed from one person to another, the police showed little concern. To them, these women were just addicts, just prostitutes. Their disappearances not important enough to warrant a serious investigation. What chills me to the bone is thinking about the silence. Thousands of people once set foot in Piggy Palace. They danced, they drank, they sought pleasure. But how many of them realized that beneath their feet, those dried bloodstains were not only from pigs, but also from human beings who never returned? Do you dare believe that a place once called a charity organization could become one of the most horrifying crime scenes in the world? Or do you think this is nothing more than a rumor blown out of proportion over the years? Let me know what you choose to believe in the comments. There was a time when an entire neighborhood in Vancouver seemed to be under a spell. Women kept disappearing, one after another. Low track, just 10 blocks long, yet it felt like a massive trap. You went out at night, you looked around, and you saw fewer friends, fewer familiar faces. You heard about her, then about another one, vanishing after stepping into a pickup truck. The whole community was suffocating with tension. People no longer dared to walk alone, only venturing out in groups. They scrutinized every strange car passing by, every unfamiliar face lurking on the corner. When they finally gathered enough courage to go to the police, all they got in return was a shrug. The police said those women were addicts, prostitutes, that their disappearances were inevitable. Maybe they ran off somewhere. Maybe they overdosed. Don't make it a big deal. That was nearly the only response. What makes my blood boil to the point I can't sit still is this. All the signs were there. The consecutive disappearances, the panicked community, the rumors of a serial killer spreading everywhere. Yet the police stood aside, even denied it. They gave the murderer more time, more victims, more chances to turn Piggy Palace into the gates of hell. And then, on the night of March 22nd, 1997, the truth nearly came out. A woman came running, banging on the door of a neighbor's house near the Pickton farm, her body covered in blood, clutching her stomach where a knife wound was still bleeding, a handcuff dangling from her wrist. The horrified neighbor opened the door, took her inside, and called an ambulance. That woman's name was Wendy. And when Wendy told her story in the emergency room, it unfolded like a living nightmare. She said Robert Pickton had tried to restrain her with handcuffs, and when she fought back, he pulled out a knife and stabbed her straight in the stomach. In desperation, Wendy managed to wrestle the knife away, stab him in the face, and then run for her life until she found safety. Soon after, Robert Pickton himself showed up at the same hospital, bearing a large wound on his face. Police stormed in, searched him, and found a key in his pocket. That key fit perfectly into the handcuffs still hanging from Wendy's wrist. Everything matched. An attacker, a surviving victim, the evidence right there in their hands. This should have been the turning point that ended the crimes early. But what happened next outraged the entire community. Pickton denied it, claiming Wendy had attacked him, that she was just an addict trying to steal from him, and that he was only defending himself. And the police believed him. All charges were dismissed, and Pickton walked out of the station as if nothing had ever happened. Meanwhile, in downtown Eastside, women continued to vanish, one by one. And there was one man who could never shake off the guilt of what he had witnessed. Bill Hiscox, a laborer who once worked for the Pickton family. He said Robert was an eccentric, frightening man, and he repeatedly called the tip line, warning police that Pickton was connected to the missing women. But every time his warnings were brushed aside, not enough evidence to open an investigation. Each alarm rang into silence. All the while, Pickton's pickup truck kept quietly pulling up to low track, still picking up souls that would never return. 5 years passed. By February 2002, another unexpected opportunity arose. A worker who had once been employed at the farm reported that Robert was keeping illegal weapons in his trailer. This time, the police finally had a reason to act. They stormed the farm, searched it, and indeed found illegal firearms. But what was more terrifying were the items they stumbled upon. Identification papers, personal belongings of women who had disappeared. And in a dark corner, there was dried blood that hadn't yet been cleaned away. Robert was arrested. But once again, the law let him slip through. He was released on bail, even though suspicion was now undeniable. Only when the DNA from the blood matched that of a missing victim were the police finally forced to act a second time. Pickton was arrested again, this time with no way to deny it. And that was only the tip of the iceberg. In jail, Pickton was placed in a cell with a man he believed was another inmate. But in reality, that man was an undercover officer. Their conversations were recorded, and in moments of arrogance, Robert Pickton confessed to something Canada would never forget.
I find the best way to fucking dispose of something so I can take it in the ocean. Oh, really? Oh, fuck. You know what the fucking ocean is? Ain't much left. But even than that. Who? Me? No. Much fucking left. I'm gonna stop it. I was gonna do one more, maybe even 50. That's what I was stopping people for. Yeah. I'm gonna do one more, make a big battle. Make the big 5 cents. And this is a picture. How many of those would tell me? I would tell him. Yeah. You gotta get 40 equals a list. And that whole list is I'm gonna have people.
He had killed 49 women. His voice was disturbingly calm, as if he were recounting an achievement. And even more horrifying, he said he stopped at 49, only because he wanted to make it an even 50. Think about that. If Wendy hadn't survived that night in 1997, the number could have far surpassed 50. If Bill Hiscox had been listened to, dozens of women might not have lost their lives. If the police hadn't released Pickton after those first arrests, Canadian history might not have been scarred with one of its darkest stains. But all of it happened. And for years, a serial killer walked free in broad daylight simply because those who should have stopped him chose to look away. What chills me is the silence between the moments when Pickton was nearly exposed. During those stretches of time, he kept doing what he did best: hunting. Every failure of the system was not just an administrative mistake, but a death sentence for more innocent women. And when the truth finally surfaced, it shocked Canada, not only for the brutality of one man, but for the helplessness and indifference of an entire system. The question that lingers to this day: does the greatest guilt lie with Robert Pickton, the man who murdered 49 women, or with the missed opportunities, the times justice turned its back, giving him all that time to keep killing? I wish this were just a fabricated story meant to scare. But it is all true. When the police were finally forced to dig through Robert Pickton's farm, spanning over 30,000 square meters, what they unearthed made the entire country nauseous, horrified, and silent. 300,000 cubic meters of soil and pig manure were sifted through, every fragment of bone, every drop of blood examined. And what remained were only dismembered body parts, shards of bone, DNA left behind in a smear of dried blood, the remnants of at least 26 women. Not a single body intact. The way Pickton killed, by his own account, was no different from slaughtering a pig. He tied up his victims, handcuffed them, whispered chillingly into their ears, "It's over." Then he would inject antifreeze straight into their veins, or strangle them until their final breath faded. And once life left their bodies, he dragged them to the slaughterhouse, where iron hooks still dangled from the ceiling. There he butchered them the way one butchers a pig, chopping, cutting, carving, dismembering. The most haunting part wasn't the death itself, but how he disposed of the remains. Some of the bodies he fed to the pigs on his farm. Some he loaded onto his truck and delivered to a rendering plant in downtown Eastside, the very place where he often found his victims. There, human flesh was ground up, boiled down, turned into gelatin, the same substance found in gummy candy, lipstick, and cosmetics that millions of people use every day. Think about it. How many families, how many children unknowingly put into their mouths candy tainted with the ashes of those women? How many women painted their lips with lipstick that carried traces of the victims? This truth shook society to its core, and it went far beyond the scope of a single criminal case. It was a nightmare that crept into everyday life. But the horror did not stop there. Pickton even kept what he called the best cuts of meat, ground them up, mixed them with pork, and turned them into sausages. And those sausages he generously handed out to neighbors, to parties, even donated to orphanages. People ate them, praised them, believed they were nothing more than a simple gift. They had no idea that they were biting into the flesh of missing women. When I read this, I couldn't help but shiver. Because perhaps those who attended the Piggy Palace parties, the neighbors, even innocent children in orphanages, had unknowingly swallowed parts of the victims. The most painful question is, did anyone notice? Did anyone taste something strange in the sausage? Did anyone ever suspect, but then shake their head and dismiss it? In 2002, when the police formally brought charges, Robert Pickton was accused of murdering 26 women. But in the end, only 6 charges stuck due to sufficient evidence.
Again, for drugs, now my addiction. I did blackmail him a couple times.
He was sentenced to life in prison without parole. On sentencing day, the court coldly read out the names of the victims, but the haunting truth is that dozens of other names were never spoken because there was no longer anything left to prove they had ever existed.
意味着剩余数十名受害者再也等不到法律的公正审判。皮克顿最终被判处无期徒刑，且至少25年内不得假释。
The entire tragedy belonged to Robert alone. The case was closed, but its echoes never faded. Families never recovered the remains of their daughters, left only with a DNA result from a drop of blood. A society left shaken, forced to wonder if the everyday products they once used contained a part of the victims. And a question that repeats itself. If Wendy hadn't escaped that night in 1997, if Bill Hiscox hadn't persistently reported to police, if one worker hadn't tipped off about the gun in the trailer, would the number have stopped at 49 or climbed to 50, 60, even 100? What chokes me when telling this story is not only the cruelty of one man, but the truth that society gave him the chance to continue. They heard the cries for help, they saw the signs, but they chose to believe those women were not worth caring about. And it was that indifference that turned Pickton into the most brutal serial killer in Canadian history. So what do you think? Does the greatest evil lie in the blood-stained hands of Robert Pickton, or in the silence and turning away of a society that abandoned those women from the very beginning?